Asian Americans need to decenter whiteness.
As an Asian American, I know that a lot of my privilege comes from our proximity to whiteness. And with that privilege comes a certain level of protection that is not the case for everybody, particularly Black and brown folks.
Asians who want to be white so bad.
The core reason that this country is suffering so much is because you never believed in Black people. You never believed what Black people were trying to tell you the entire time. You believed the white narrative of your survival over empathy, hearing somebody else out, because you were afraid that if you were to activate your empathy, you would recognize the violence that you are co-signing by surviving amongst the white narrative. So as your psychosis goes into fragile, numb, sensitive, entitled, and Black people are still prepared for whatever is coming tomorrow, and they know how to process pain and grief with their community, with each other, they'll still be here. And the indigenous as well. I'm not going to leave them out of this conversation because this is so important. And go to the reservations of this land. All right, those are the projects that this American government placed out of mind, out of dialogue, out of conversation as well.
I want us to discuss about this topic, Asian Americans' proximity to whiteness. You have probably seen it. Many Asian Americans tend to associate themselves with white people instead of associating themselves with other minority groups. And as Asian Americans are also a member of minority groups in America, we would expect them to unite with other minority groups, including Black people, so that they can fight for the same cause. But instead, these Asian Americans always tend to associate themselves with whiteness. Why is that? You have probably heard it. Many Asian parents tell their kids not to be friends with Black people. They tell them not to act like Black people. They always tell their family members that Blackness is something bad to avoid. It's something that confuses many Black Americans, and that's why I decided to discuss about it today. I want us to listen to these clips of Asian Americans mostly. I will come back at the end and give you the full insights that will help you to connect dots. Remember to like the video.
It's so cringe seeing Asian people try to cater to white people. Asian people act like proximity to whiteness makes them superior. You can literally feel the energy shift when someone has internalized racism. It's this weird mix of embarrassment, superiority, and I'm not like those other Asians vibes. And honestly, it's painful to watch. I've seen it so many times. Some Asians act like the second they get a white friend group, they level up in the social hierarchy. Suddenly, everything Asian is cringe or weird or low tier. And you know what's the funniest part? They'll distance themselves from anything remotely Asian like it's toxic, and then they will over cater to their white partners or friends. Do you hear yourselves? It's like watching someone actively shrink themselves to fit into a box that was never built for them in the first place. Look, I get it, alright? A lot of Asians grow up being praised for assimilation. A lot of us are raised to believe whiteness equals safety, opportunity, acceptance. That's literally how internalized racism works. But acting like being white adjacent makes you superior to your own culture. Acting disgusted at your own food, your own features, your own background. It's not about hating anyone. It's more about calling out a pattern that harms all of us.
Dear Asians, hopefully we've learned now not to crave white acceptance. Craving proximity to whiteness brought us this, and this, and this, which just happened recently. And, you know, if you think that you're safe because you're not a foreigner, they can legally, racially profile you, so it doesn't even matter. I present to you a chance to stand up against the white nationalist agenda and to do these actions to help bring Yuanxing home.
Here's what I don't mean. I don't mean that white people see us as white, or that they treat us as if we are white people. I also don't mean that Asian Americans don't face discrimination and racism in the US, because obviously we do. But it is being intentionally ignorant, in my opinion, to say that Asian Americans face the same deeply entrenched and structural inequalities as Black and brown folks in the US. I think what drives some of this feeling within the Asian American community is this feeling that, we have not been taken seriously, that the discrimination and racism that we face isn't acknowledged. But two things can be true. We can both demand that the racism and discrimination that we face be acknowledged and addressed, while also understanding that the systematic inequalities that the Black and brown community faces is different in kind than the history of Asian American racism in this country.
It is deeply embarrassing to watch some of you move like proximity to whiteness is a shield. Like if you clap loud enough, defend hard enough, bootlick enthusiastically enough, somehow ICE is going to look at you and say, "No, not you. You're one of the good ones." Are you gago? You are not white. No matter how hard you try, no matter how much you bleach, filter, straighten, soften, assimilate, whiteness is not a rewards program. There is no platinum membership for being the loudest in the comments, defending policies that would absolutely swallow your own communities whole. And let's really get into it. A lot of you grew up Catholic. It's in the culture. You know the verses, love thy neighbor, care for the poor, protect the vulnerable. Jesus was not here building walls and cheering on mass deportation. The foundation of our faith is compassion. So how are you reconciling that with cruelty? This is that colonized mentality jumping out. The pick-me energy that thinks that if you align hard enough with power, power won't turn on you. History says otherwise. Stop thinking white is right. It is that same mentality that got the Philippines colonized. Stop confusing assimilation with safety. And stop embarrassing the diaspora by acting like oppression skips you.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm still pissed about those Asian Americans who helped that white man get rid of affirmative action. And it didn't even benefit us in the end. Unsurprisingly. So I need Asian Americans to remember that none of this was ever built for us. The lawsuit that ended affirmative action was not started by Asian Americans. It was led by Edward Bloom, a white conservative activist who has spent years just trying to dismantle civil rights protections because that's the type of person he is. He created Students for Fair Admissions and specifically recruited Asian American plaintiffs to frame this narrative as Harvard discriminates against Asians, but this was never about helping us. It was about using us, as always. About using us to attack policies designed to create equity and level the playing field. Now, you have probably seen a lot of people saying that affirmative action lowers the bar. Oh, DEI also lowers the bar. They're not the same thing, but people think they are. That is so misleading, and it's rooted in anti-blackness. Also, are we noticing the percentage of white people admitted and the overwhelmingly white legacy admissions at these institutions is something that specifically never gets touched in this conversation? Why is that? Is it clicking? So here's some facts from the case. So Asian students did have the highest GPAs and test scores, but got rated lower on personal qualities by the admissions officers. And for identical profiles, Asian applicants had a 25% chance of getting in, while black applicants had a 95% chance. And that stat gets weaponized to imply that black students are less qualified, but affirmative action isn't lowering the standard. It's about addressing systemic inequities caused by racist policies like housing discrimination, segregated schools, and the wealth gap, etc. This is classic model minority propaganda portraying Asian Americans as proof that racism is over to justify attacking other communities. That is exactly why they ended the immigration ban against Asians in the US and then only allowed in high-achieving Asians from Asia, scientists, doctors, etc., to come to the US so that they could use us to prove that they weren't racist to black people during the Cold War. I need you to pay attention to historical context about how this has all gone down. History is rhyming. It's the same thing. Here's the thing. I want to say that 69% of Asian Americans actually support affirmative action, and advocacy groups like Chinese for Affirmative Action and CIRAC fought to keep it. The loudest anti-affirmative action voices do not represent all of the Asian community. They do represent a narrative designed to divide us, though. And for Asian Americans, especially young Asian Americans, I need you to hear me. Even though many in our community do not align with the model minority nonsense, I can attest to that being true, the ones who do are often the ones that get the most visibility because playing that role perpetuates white supremacy. And at the end of the day, we have to be real about all of this. None of this was ever for us anyways. This country literally had laws banning us from being here. We have always been seen as outsiders. We have only ever been used as a tool, a wedge to uphold white supremacy, and then they will scapegoat us the second they need to. That has always happened in times of sickness, war, and a loss of jobs. And it is on us to disrupt that role, to stop aligning with anti-blackness, and to refuse to be used as puppets for systems that were never built for us anyway. It is imperative that we as Asian Americans learn our history, learn how we've been used, understand it, and choose solidarity. Because if we're not fighting these systems together, we are always on the chopping block. Remember how they treated us during COVID. Until next time, y'all.
Honestly, yeah. And it's really unfortunate and really embarrassing and shameful that Asians do crave that proximity to whiteness so badly that we're willing to not be in solidarity with other BIPOC or Black, queer, brown folk. Like, it's... we can always boil things down to like childhood and upbringing, but I like to always say, like, this is what I kind of learned in therapy. Like, once you're an adult and you realize you have free will and you realize you have the agency to unlearn, relearn, like unpack and discover life, that you start to realize how fucked up it is that we want that and we crave that proximity to whiteness. Like, I will say that is oftentimes with a lot of Asian Americans that I meet, East Asian Americans specifically where I'm speaking from, but like in my experience, I questioned this at such a young age, and I think that's because I didn't grow up in I grew up in a predominantly white space, but then when my parents got divorced, we ended up moving to like a lower income area, and I went to school with primarily Black and brown and like Hispanic folk, and everything changed when I was around other people of color, honestly. Like, when I was just around white people, I did want to like look white, feel white, act white. And like, you know, everyone back then, I remember Twinkie was a thing. And then when I moved to like the different neighborhoods, and also then I moved to LA because I'm from DC, and then I like moved my life over here, and I have not gone back to the East Coast. I'm never gonna live on the East Coast again unless it's like New York or like possibly Miami, but I want my Spanish to get better first. But it's our responsibility as a community to be better and to do better.
Somebody needs to explain to me why do they think they're white?
Okay, I wish I could stitch that video, but basically that person is asking, this person wants to know why so many Korean Americans try so hard to be white. Or in other words, why do so many Korean Americans try so desperately hard to be accepted by white people, and why do we think that we will benefit from white supremacy? And the answer is U.S. imperialism. It's always U.S. imperialism. Particularly migration pathways that were carved out by military occupation. So let me explain. When I was really young, my mom used to always tell me, oh, if you go to Korea, if you live in Korea, people there are going to hate you. And I remember that confusing me so much as a kid, because why would they hate me without knowing me? And so I tried to, press her for an answer, and she would just say, oh, it's for no reason. They're just jealous that you get to live in the U.S. Flash forward, when I'm in school or college and I'm taking Asian American studies courses, classes in critical race studies, and I'm like, oh, I get it now. A lot of us already know the U.S. is not this benevolent country that takes care of its citizens, let alone immigrants, indigenous people, even its own veterans. And abroad, the U.S. terrorizes the global South through military occupation and other means, which includes Korea. You don't ever hear about or see Korean people in Korea protesting U.S. occupation, but it's there. And there's still this dream or hope of both Koreas one day reuniting or being reunified. Very generally speaking, more recent Korean immigration into the U.S., or maybe I should say from the 1970s onwards, these are people who have the means to. They have the money, the capital, the resources, the social connections, and maybe even more importantly, they want to come and live here. So are the people who resent the U.S. for imposing themselves into the homeland, dividing the nation into two, and in the process separating families forever, are they going to want to uproot their lives to live in the country responsible for that pain and suffering and ultimately this loss of self-determination? Or are the people who sympathize with the U.S. and view the country as this welcoming, benevolent nation, as the saviors almost for coming into the war, are they going to be the ones to want to move and live here? The people that immigrated are probably people who sympathized with U.S. involvement in the war and who also subscribed to the idea of the American dream, and generally speaking, tended to be of the ruling class. And they get here they either become disillusioned by it, the American dream, and start to question the ideas they've been told, or they hang on to it even tighter, and blame other groups of people, other groups of marginalized people, for not being able to self-actualize this dream. This is just coming from my experience, observations, things that I've learned as a Korean American who has family members on both ends of the political spectrum. But, and again, I'm simplifying things a lot, but I also think that this general idea or explanation could also be applied to other East Asian and Southeast Asian communities. And if this topic interests you at all in the slightest, I highly, highly, highly recommend reading Haunting the Korean Diaspora by Grace Cho. It's a small book, but kind of heavy because it gets into some really dark stuff. But yeah, that's my answer.
Here are 3 ways that Asian adoptees have to navigate proximity to whiteness and discussions about racism with their white adoptive parents. Hi, my name is Dr. Yi. I'm a professor who studies and teaches about Asian American psychology, and I want to share this important recent research on this qualitative study about transracial Korean and Chinese adoptees. First, they reported experiencing significant adoptive parent barriers and racial erasure. Almost every participant mentioned a colorblind attitude and approach from their adoptive parents, many telling their children that they raised them to be white. Some even share that their white adoptive parents make openly racist remarks in front of them, at times about Asian people, at other times about other racial groups. Second, there were these internal barriers for adoptees, such as feeling that inner conflict with their racial identity, feeling inauthentic or like a fraud. Individuals mentioned that although they are racially Asian, they might never fit into a non-adoptive Asian group. Then internalized racism may manifest as a means of survival. Third and finally, there are external barriers that are important to note, such as anti-Asian racism and fear that was experienced during the pandemic. And so a big takeaway from this research is that we need to challenge that anti-Asian racism, which the authors argue is often insidiously disguised through this belief that transracial Asian adoptees are given privilege through proximity to whiteness through their white adoptive families.
Why are Asian people and communities more accepting of marriages with white women and men rather than black women and men? This is one concept that has never made sense to me, and is South Asian and East Asian. But if a black woman even has a good job, a steady income, everything, her life is set, it will still be hard for her to be accepted by an Asian family. Whereas a white woman could be an absolute hippie, but it's easier for her to be accepted into an Asian family during marriage. So yeah, if there's anyone out there who can explain sort of why Asian communities are more accepting of their own culture marrying white people rather than black people, let me know.
I'm gonna say something that y'all aren't gonna like, but there is an expectation that Asian people will pander to white people. It's rooted in xenophobia and the model minority myth. If we look back at history, a lot of Black American culture was born essentially because white people stripped Black people of their ethnic culture, heritage, and roots. As a lot of us know, a lot of Black Americans don't even know where their African ancestors are exactly from because their history was erased and destroyed through slavery. And a lot of Black American culture was created in spite of white people and their perpetuation of racism. So a lot of Black Americans created products that were made for them based on their features, and they also cultivated their own culture within the context of the United States and kept it alive despite systemic racism that they constantly faced. So if Black people see a white person come into their space that was created in spite of them, obviously there are going to be side eyes, but the reason why there are side eyes is much more obvious. So if a Black creator created a similar video to what Madeline did, the white person saying, "Oh my gosh, this is racist, this is prejudice," would look much more blatantly racist. And the discrepancy lies in that Asian people came to this country voluntarily. So white people subconsciously hold this like entitled energy against Asian people. It's sort of this sentiment of like, wow, we let you come into our country and now you're gonna gatekeep things from us? Classic model minority myth. A lot of us have also seen our culture become gentrified, fetishized, appropriated with no respect to the actual culture. Like, let's be so honest here, like it wasn't until a couple years ago until white people stopped labeling our food as like disgusting or smelly or exotic. So when it comes to the context of the United States, a lot of Asian Americans have this like conflicted emotion of wanting to share our culture but not wanting it to be disrespected.
For the first time, I was experiencing what W.E.B. Du Bois famously called double consciousness consciousness, that sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, experienced by people of color in a white supremacist society. It's an odd feeling of disassociation and splitting, of being trapped between the white gaze and your own. For Du Bois, the white world saw him as a black, I just put that in quotations, a distillation of racial stereotypes and presumed inferiority entirely at odds with his own sense of self and humanity. I was not black, but I too had been slotted in a category of racial other, and I too felt a splitting, a fault line in my sense of self. Who was I, or rather, what was I? What did white people see when they looked at me? The story of Black-Asian relations in this country is the story of whiteness, which set the stage for the drama to come. Whiteness cast Asians as perpetual foreigners and the model minority. Whiteness cast Black people as perpetual criminals and the problem minority, and then sat on the sidelines to watch what happened. Left behind by white people, but still shaped by the logic of white supremacy, my father and his Black customers were supposed to see each other as rivals rather than allies. They'd been trapped in the American racial imaginary, that sleight of hand that makes us all focus on one another's differences rather than on the sharp white background of white supremacy. The forces that endorse segregation, police Black communities, and starve them of resources and opportunities are the same forces that deem those of Asian descent unfit for American citizenship, banned them from immigrating to the United States, and incarcerated them in concentration camps during World War II. Whiteness maintains its power, and communities of color are left to fight for their place on the lower rungs of the American racial hierarchy.
If proximity to whiteness isn't real, how did the Irish and Italians become white? Y'all love to bring up the Irish and the Italians in the US when people of color are talking. So here's the key thing that people keep missing about this. Irish and Italian immigrants were never people of color. They were always legally white in the United States. What they experienced historically was not racial exclusion in the same way that Asians, Black, or Indigenous people experience. It was ethnic, religious, and class-based discrimination inside of whiteness. They didn't just gain whiteness, they were invited into the dominant white social category over time. And because they are white Europeans, as in white and European, they blended right in, something people of color will never experience and never know. Legally under US law, Irish and Italians were classified as free white persons. They could naturalize, vote, own land, and testify in court in ways that Asians, Indigenous people, and Black people could not. That legal distinction matters. It's the difference between being discriminated against and being structurally excluded from humanity under the law. They were also classified as white in the census. Socially, yeah, they were treated as some sort of in-between. They were mocked, stereotyped, targeted for being Catholic, poor, foreign, culturally different. But this was white people policing the boundaries of whiteness against other white people. This is not the same thing as racialization of people of color. And here's the part that often gets left out of this conversation. Their eventual social acceptance and blending into whiteness came through alignment with the racial power hierarchy, not resistance to it. Irish and Italian communities gained access to jobs, unions, policing, and political power largely by distancing themselves from Black Americans as a collective and reinforcing anti-Black racism. That wasn't accidental. It is how whiteness expands when it is useful to do so. And because, once again, they are white Europeans. They blend right in. Nobody can tell the difference. We see similar behavior with Jews in the US as well too, because most Jews are actually European descendants, right? Whiteness is a social and political category that flexes to protect power. It expanded to include Irish and Italians to strengthen the white working class and maintain a buffer against people of color. That flexibility has never extended to Asians, Black people, or Indigenous people in the same way. And this is why bringing up Irish and Italian people in a conversation about Asian Americans, which this was a comment on a video about Asian Americans, right? And people of color in general, it's actually just so irrelevant. Right now, Irish and Italian Americans are fully considered white, socially, politically, etc. They blend into whiteness. People of color cannot opt into whiteness no matter how much we assimilate. I can't even do that, and my mother's white. So in my original video, where I was talking about proximity to whiteness being an illusion for people of color, we're ultimately saying this.
Temporary conditional acceptance is not power, safety, or equality. It can be revoked. It has been revoked historically because people of color do not blend into whiteness and never will on purpose. And centering Irish and Italian assimilation in conversations about people of color is another way that whiteness continues to recenter itself even when the topic is explicitly about non-white communities. It's similar to white immigrants and children of white immigrants trying to center themselves in the conversations around immigration. You have privilege in the hierarchy. By all means, talk about your experiences, but you have to be very mindful and intersectional when doing so. And really, you gotta show up in solidarity, or else what are you doing? At the end of the day, though, centering yourself in the conversation is just upholding the system. But that is not truly proximity to whiteness either, because y'all are white and can blend in. You are ultimately protected and benefit because of that. Notice how even though there are over 500,000 undocumented white European immigrants in the US, none of these ICE agents are kidnapping white people off the street and ripping families apart and trying to deport them. Why is that? One guess. Different histories, different legal realities, different stakes. And if we don't keep these distinctions clear, we will keep misunderstanding how race actually works in this country. And if you feel some type of way about the history or whatever, we got to deal with what the present reality is. And this is not me in any way saying that what the Irish experienced, what the Jewish people experienced and continue to experience, especially after the horrific anti-Semitic attack that happened in Australia, what Italian people experienced, I'm not saying that any of that wasn't bad. But I am saying that there is a distinction. And when people of color are talking about our experiences, being actually in solidarity, being actually informed and aware of how whiteness is upheld. That awareness is key in how you're going to show up in this conversation. But when you're constantly redirecting it and recentering on white experiences to either deflect or dismiss, whether you think that's your intention or not, you're actually just upholding the system as it is.
A lot of these Asian American voices that you're watching are not just talking about white people. They're talking about a mindset. They're talking about what happens when a community starts to believe that getting closer to whiteness is the only way to feel safe, to feel accepted, or to be successful in America. For many Asian Americans, to them, proximity to whiteness looks like a protection, like opportunity, like social status. But they are also saying it in those clips that this protection is not permanent, it's conditional. And we have seen many incidents where this happened. For instance, if you remember how these Asian Americans were targeted, were attacked during COVID-19, their proximity to whiteness did not help them. We have also seen it during wars, job loss, or political tension. Most of these Asian Americans who have tried so hard to be assimilated into the whiteness were suddenly treated like outsiders. But I think even though there are some Asian Americans who assimilate into the whiteness just for survival, there are others who assimilate due to the deeper internalized racism or anti-blackness. Some speakers have explained it very well by using everyday examples. The way some Asian Americans start acting embarrassed about their own culture. You will sometimes hear those kinds of Asians saying, "I am not like those other Asians," just because they are surrounded with many white friends. They started thinking that they have socially leveled up. And it's not always loud or obvious, but you can feel the shift when you are with them. And many of these speakers have connected this behavior to the model minority myth. The idea that Asians are the proof that racism does not exist anymore. That if one minority group can succeed, the system must be fair. And the speakers have spoken it very well, that this narrative was never neutral. It was used politically, it was used to divide communities and attack policies that were meant to attack inequality. We will not ignore the fact that Asian Americans also face racism, but the type of racism and the structure of it is totally different from what Black Americans and Indigenous Americans have been experiencing for many centuries. And it's not about ranking the pains of these groups, it's about understanding the history. In those clips, they have also explained about affirmative action. Some speakers have explained how Asian Americans were used as the public face of lawsuits with bigger political agendas. The idea is that the fight was framed as helping Asians, but at the end, it weakened civil rights protections that were helping multiple communities. One speaker talks about Korean immigration and how US military involvement shaped who left, who stayed, and who believed in American dream. The point there is that these attitudes did not just appear randomly. They were shaped by wars, migration policies, and class backgrounds. In the clips, they have explained a little bit about psychology perspective. Asian adoptees who were adopted in the white families grow up being told that they were raised to act white, to be white. And that creates identity conflict. It creates internal barriers. And sometimes to these adoptees, internalized racism becomes survival strategy, not a choice. Then there is this question about dating and marriage that was asked in those clips. Why are many Asian families feel comfortable with their children getting married to white people, but not comfortable with them being married to black people? I think that's pointing to deeper issues like colorism, status, stereotypes, and the idea that whiteness represents social mobility. At the end of those clips, one idea ties everything together. Whiteness is described as a system that assigns laws. Asians get labeled as the model minority. Black people get labeled as criminals or the problem. And then the system sits back and watches the tension between the two. The real message in this video is not really about Asian Americans. It's about what happens when communities chase acceptance. It's about recognizing how divide and conquer strategy have worked for many generations. My final message to Asian Americans is that assimilation may give you comfort for a short time, but solidarity is what creates long-term power. When communities understand their history and stand together, it becomes very hard for the system to use one group against another. And I want you all guys to remember that unity is better than anything, and there is no good outcome from division. That's my message to Asian Americans, to Black Americans, and to everyone who have watched the video until this time. Now, let me ask you for a favor. If you have enjoyed watching the video, please support me by liking it and by dropping your own opinions in the comment section. If you have not yet subscribed, please remember to click on the subscribe button so that you join our good family. See you next time. Ciao.